Traore didn't come to Moscow to sip tea or smile for cameras. He came for something far more intense, something that speaks louder than any peace treaty ever could. He's already shaken hands with Venezuela's President Maduro, a man so unwelcome in Washington, his name alone can clear a room on Capitol Hill. And here's the question on everyone's mind. Why is Russia, a country known for keeping its stage reserved for giants, handing the spotlight to a 36-year-old African man in military boots? To answer that, we need to look past the surface. It's May 8th, 2025. Moscow is gearing up for its grandest ritual, the Victory Day Parade. This isn't just Russia flexing its muscles. It's sacred ground. A day when the nation remembers how it bled to defeat Hitler, how it stood against the West and survived. Its tanks, warplanes, medals and memories, all rolled into one thunderous statement. We are still here. Now imagine Traore walking into that thunder, not as a spectator but as part of the storm. This isn't some symbolic handshake. This is psychological warfare. Russia isn't just hosting an African leader, it's aligning with him. And the world is watching. Forget the jets roaring above. The real noise is in the quiet message. A young African soldier president is walking shoulder to shoulder with a man who spent decades outmaneuvering the West. It's not just about Traore being there, it's about where he's standing, right at the heart of the empire's biggest show of strength, right where Africa was never expected to appear. And yet, there he is, unbothered, unshaken. For years, May 9th has been Russia's reminder to the world. We don't forget, we don't bow. But now with Traore on that stage, that reminder carries a new accent, one that speaks of colonial scars, of defiance, of a continent done playing by someone else's script. This isn't Africa waiting for a seat at the table. This is Africa bringing its own chair and placing it beside the Kremlin. And Traore isn't alone. This year, 7 African heads of state are flying into Moscow. Egypt, Zimbabwe, Congo, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, and yes, Burkina Faso. They're not coming for vacation photos, they're coming for alignment, for recognition, for power. Even South Africa, without sending its president, is making sure it's seen, dispatching its defence minister to stand in solidarity. What's happening here isn't coincidence, it's choreography, and it's a dance that was never meant to include Africa. Until now. If this story has stirred something in you, even just a little, then don't scroll past without doing your part. Hit that like button to show you're not one of the silent ones. Subscribe to The New Tourist if you believe these truths deserve to be heard, not buried. And don't keep this to yourself. Share this video with someone who still thinks they understand Africa. Because if we stay quiet, we're no better than those who stood by and watched history burn. We're no better than those leaders who ravage their countries, then go around begging for money from other countries. Now let's get back to the story. Russia and Burkina Faso might not share the same size, language or history, but right now they share a message loud enough to rattle the halls of every Western capital. You thought we would fold, you thought we'd crawl, you thought wrong. And what makes this even more powerful? Traore didn't come to play it safe. He walked straight into a spotlight most Western leaders actively avoided. That parade, the one the world watches every year, was quietly boycotted by nearly every major NATO country. Europe sat this one out, arms crossed, eyes averted, hoping no one would notice who did show up. But the world noticed, because Traore wasn't just attending, he was making history. There he stood, in Red Square of all places, a young African leader, once brushed off as just another soldier with too much ambition, now side by side with one of the most feared political architects of the 21st century. This wasn't some symbolic cameo, this was a shift in narrative. For decades, African presidents have been flying to Paris, to London, to Washington, often greeted with polite smiles and polite demands, and they returned with aid packages tied in red tape, along with reminders of who holds the leash. But Traore didn't fly west, he flew east. He didn't come to ask, he came to act. And that act, just standing there, head high, eyes forward, was revolutionary in itself. Victory Day didn't suddenly become Africa's celebration, but in that fleeting moment, it turned into common ground. A place where Russia's memories of standing up to fascism collided with Africa's present fight to stand free of neo-colonial chains. The handshake between Putin and Traore wasn't some bland formality. It was a line drawn in the sand, a visual rewrite of a world order that for decades wrote Africa out of the story, except when counting its resources or its tragedies. Now Africa isn't knocking at the door. It's stepping right through it. No invitation needed. But don't be fooled by the parades and camera flashes, because the real story started when the noise died down, when the jets stopped screaming, when the medals were pinned and the world turned its gaze elsewhere. That's when the important part began. Traore didn't fly all the way to Moscow to wave at tanks. That was the stage play. The real drama. It happened in whispers, behind thick Kremlin doors where microphones couldn't reach, in quiet rooms where alliances are born and strategies are mapped. Because Africa isn't waiting for its war to begin. It's already knee-deep in it. This isn't just about bullets or budgets. It's a war fought in currency markets, in drone surveillance, in media spin, and in the chokeholds of foreign policy. And behind closed doors, what Traore and Putin discussed may end up redrawing more than just lines on a map. It may redraw the very direction of Africa's future. Burkina Faso isn't shaking hands just to take photos. It's stitching together a new survival plan, one built not on slogans or speeches, but on real hard deterrence. This isn't about finding friends. It's about building firewalls, political, military, digital, and economic. And right now, Russia isn't just offering support, it's offering oxygen. For Traore, the days of smiling politely, while the West smiled back and stabbed deeper, are done. He's not in Moscow to mingle. He's there to make sure Burkina Faso never again has to knock on Paris's door with a begging bowl. And Moscow is listening. Behind those closed doors, according to diplomatic whispers and early intelligence leaks, the conversations weren't about aid. There were no donation drives or development lectures. It was something far more serious: mutual survival. The New Deal? Not charity, strategy. First up, military muscle. For years, Burkina Faso has limped along with second-hand French rifles, mismatched gear, and supply chains that break with every political tremor in the region. That's over. Now Traore wants a fortress, not a patch job. He's talking full-spectrum defence, air surveillance radars, anti-drone tech, encrypted comms, elite training hubs built not in the image of NATO, but in the rough resilience of Russian war doctrine. Not just to keep enemies out, but to keep coups, drone strikes and espionage from ever getting in. Next, energy. Burkina Faso might not be an oil giant, but it's been choked more than once by fuel shortages and imported dependency. Russia's offering an alternative. State firms like Gazprom and Rosatom are exploring ways to bring in modular nuclear units, solar hybrids, and barter-style deals, grain for power, fuel for gold, no dollar strings, no IMF lectures, no Western green traps dressed as eco-aid. In return, Russia gains more than just a handshake. It gets access, deep access, to gold veins, rare minerals, and a permanent seat at the Sahel's most strategic table. And then there's the digital battlefield, one the West pretends is neutral, but which Traore sees for what it is, a new colonization. Today's chains don't clink, they click. Algorithms engineered in California track dissent, reframe protest, amplify chaos, and bury truth under sanitized noise. Traore knows this, so do the Russians. And in Moscow, this topic was at the heart of everything. Russia laid out its playbook, firewall systems tested in Syria, tuned in Belarus, refined in Iran. Tools not just to block Western surveillance, but to intercept it, to repel digital sabotage before it lands. These aren't pop-up blockers. These are digital shields capable of sealing off entire nations from foreign psychological warfare. Traore's goal isn't to shut the internet down, It's to make sure Africa's voice isn't drowned out by 1,000 foreign echoes. The West calls it censorship, but deep down they know what's really happening. Africa is refusing to let someone else write its code. For the first time, the continent isn't just guarding its land, it's defending its data. And underneath it all lies the issue that makes Western diplomats squirm the most: money, currency. The CFA franc, France's fingerprint on African wallets, is being questioned in every corridor where Traore, Mali and Niger sit together. But replacing one colonial currency with another Western label, that would be economic suicide. So what comes next? In Moscow, a new kind of deal is being drawn. Quietly, deliberately, outside the glare of traditional finance. This isn't about signing paperwork at a glitzy summit or posing for the cameras. It's about rewriting the rules of the global economy. Using shovels, satellites, instead of dealing in euros and dollars, the model now forming is simple and primal. Trade what you have for what you need. Grain for gold, uranium for drones, roads for long-term protection. No Paris approvals, no IMF transparency conditions, no need to clear it through SWIFT. Russia's SPFS financial system, the shadow twin of the West's monetary highway, is the new road, and through it, Traore is helping carve a trade route that skips French banks and skips the Western chokehold entirely. And that shift, that's not just economic, that's psychological warfare flipped on its head, because for the first time in a very long time, it's Africa choosing who handles its money. Africa choosing the rules. Make no mistake, none of this will show up in press briefings. The official story will be silence. No confirmations, no details. Why? Because NATO's satellites are watching. IMF consultants are circling. The EU is already whispering new support packages, all with invisible strings. But the step has been taken. The ground has shifted. Traore didn't travel to Moscow to run from pressure. He went to place an anchor, to weld Burkina Faso into a new machine, one that cannot be unplugged without sparks. That is what terrifies the West the most. Not the parade, not the handshake, but the permanence. A young African leader who isn't pleading for rescue, who isn't waiting to be saved, who just wants to be left. But Traore's real move wasn't just in weapons or wires, it was in something harder to measure, harder to kill. He built a myth, a new myth, a story that speaks in silence, not headlines, a story that says African power isn't a fantasy, it's a choice. And that story, it's catching fire. Because the real question now, the one buzzing in Ouagadougou, Kinshasa, Khartoum and Cairo, isn't about what Traore signed, it's about what it sparked. What does this moment mean for those watching from behind dusty school desks, from cracked phone screens, from neighbourhoods where the power flickers, but the spirit doesn't? For the frustrated, the forgotten, the fuel of future revolutions, here's what it means. Yes, you can trade weapons. Yes, you can broker energy. Yes, you can even fight cyber wars with a partner halfway around the world. But you can't manufacture belief. You can't fake the thing that makes people stand taller, talk louder, and feel like they matter again. And when Traore walked through Red Square, in a place where African leaders have never stood, not as decoration, not as disciples, but as equals, something invisible broke free. Not just an alliance, a voltage, a psychic spark, a current sent back across the ocean, through cracked sidewalks and broken dreams. Something millions didn't know they needed until they saw it. Because for decades, young Africans have lived under the ghosts of old promises, told that independence was complete, while their currencies were pegged, their democracies were bought, and their futures auctioned off at embassies they'll never visit. But then they saw the photo. One image, one man in military green, standing next to Vladimir Putin, not bowing, not smiling nervously, not holding his breath, just there. That image didn't need context, it didn't need subtitles. It said what speeches couldn't. You don't have to be like them. And in a continent where the thirst for dignity runs deeper than oil, that message was a revolution all by itself. Traore isn't just leading a government, he's stepping into something deeper, something that can't be voted on or overthrown. He's filling a space that's been left hollow for decades, not political, but emotional, spiritual, the kind of space where heroes live long after they're gone. And that's what makes him dangerous. Because Traore isn't just talking change, he's becoming the thing that Thomas Sankara never had time to fully become. A living, breathing symbol of African defiance, standing tall while the world watches. And the West, it knows exactly what that means. Western strategists understand something many African elites conveniently forget. Ideas don't die when you shoot them. You can silence a man, but you can't silence a myth once it takes root. They tried to erase Sankara with bullets, tried to dissolve Lumumba with acid, tried to exile Nkrumah into memory, but the stories lived on. Passed in whispers, painted on walls, kept alive not in museums but in hearts. Now Traore is stepping directly into that bloodstream, alive, alert, and in control. Not just echoing revolution, but building policies to match it. Not just standing in resistance, but crafting tools to defend it. And the young? They see everything. This isn't the youth of yesterday. This generation scrolls, questions, screenshots, and remembers. They're armed with history, awake to propaganda, and allergic to fake promises. They've watched their leaders fly to Europe to beg for crumbs while their streets crack and their schools crumble. They've watched as presidents shake hands in Paris and choke protests back home. They've watched their gold, lithium, and futures vanish into foreign ports under deals they never agreed to. So when they saw Traore on that stage in Moscow, standing not in shame, but in symmetry with real power, something broke open. Not just for Burkina Faso, for them, it felt like a jailbreak of the imagination, a sudden opening in the mental cage so many were born into, a voice shouting from the Kremlin steps, "You're not powerless, you're just being lied to." But belief is fragile. It doesn't survive on its own. It has to be guarded, watered, defended. Because those who've spent centuries feeding off African doubt won't let belief bloom without a fight. They'll send in the noise. There'll be think pieces, human rights reports, new sanctions with old excuses. Suddenly NGOs will discover violations they ignored for years. International headlines will twist photos into threats. They won't attack Traore's policies, they'll attack his character. Because they know that if the youth of Africa start to see him not as an outlier, but as a blueprint, the entire game changes. A myth can spark a movement. A symbol can start a storm. And if Traore captures that belief, he won't need to pass any more laws or raise any more flags. The young will do it for him. They'll become the ministers who refuse bribes, the journalists who won't be silenced, the engineers who build for their people instead of bidding for donors, the soldiers who guard their soil, not someone else's contracts, but that's only if he lasts. Because if they manage to stain him, if they fracture the symbol, poison the perception, isolate the myth, they can delay the wave, maybe not stop it, but slow it down, and Traore knows this. That's why every handshake matters. Every speech is calculated. Every partner is chosen like a chess move. He's not just governing, he's guarding something sacred, a flame under siege, and that's what made Moscow matter. Not because of Russia's weapons, not because of Putin's profile, but because, for the first time in a generation, an African leader stood beside raw, unmocked power and wasn't laughed at, wasn't dismissed, wasn't tokenized. He was seen. And that image, that one silent image, is now burned into the minds of millions across a continent that has too often been told the only way to win is to surrender. This is belief reborn, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that breathes in resistance and exhales pride. Because what's coming is a storm. Sabotage is coming, bribes dressed as partnerships, isolation disguised as diplomacy. The long knives of empire don't rest. And so the real question now begins to form, slowly, like a cloud on the horizon. Can the myth survive what's next? Because moments spark change, but it's the fight after the moment that writes history. This isn't just a story about Traore and his majestic trip to Moscow. It's about all of us, about remembering who we are, protecting African unity and solidarity, and building Africa with partners who respect us. The iconic photo of Traore beside Putin may last forever, but its power depends on what African societies choose to do next. Will they rise with the symbol, or slip back into the old habits, corruption, tribalism, dependency, that have long held them down? That's the real battle now. Because while Traore challenges foreign domination, the deeper struggle lies within. The colonial mindset didn't just come from outside, it's built into institutions, policies, and daily decisions. To truly change, Africa must not just remove foreign troops or shake hands in Moscow, it must rebuild itself from the ground up. This revolution must go beyond speeches. It must feed people, unite nations, secure economies, and inspire trust among neighbours. It must be carried not just by leaders, but by farmers, students, unionists, and journalists who are ready to sacrifice comfort for sovereignty. Education must reflect African realities. Trade must benefit Africa first. And for the AES alliance to endure, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger must do something Africa has never done at scale: build together, unapologetically. The West is already reacting, afraid not of Traore's weapons, but his meaning. Because meaning inspires and inspiration spreads. But belief is fragile. It can be buried by distraction, division, or betrayal. So the final fight won't be loud. It'll be a quiet test of discipline, patience, and unity. If Africa holds on, if it chooses to stop waiting and starts building, then May 8th, 2025 won't just be a date in history. It'll be the moment Africa took back its pen. Now the question isn't about Traore, it's about us. Will we rise with the myth or watch it fade? Let me know in the comments, and if you believe in this story, subscribe for more.